pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm really humbled by this invitation, especially because I have so many old friends in the audience. I think it's like coming home to Enugu campus. All the Enugu campus people and UNN, UNEC, raise your hands. Some of these people I haven't seen in 25 years. So thank you, Chikwe, for this wonderful opportunity, and to Ike and the rest of the team. My path to life as a social entrepreneur has been a relatively unusual one. Like Ike said, I had a wonderful and very sheltered experience as a child in the university campus, where getting a PhD was probably one of the things that my parents prayed that we would have. Academics and integrity were the bedrock of the childhood that we had. But two personal traits stood out for me when I reflect on my childhood. The first one is that I'm a middle child. I have two older sisters who are simply amazing, who could do no wrong, and two younger siblings who are adorable. And so I was a freedom fighter from a very young age, always looking for why I was being mistreated, who was siding with who, and how I could have my voice heard in a family of 5. The second thing that actually stood out for me is that I had a very hot temper. And some of you who know me now wonder, wow, how could she have a hot temper? My mother actually said that I would end up in jail by 15 if I didn't sort out my hot temper. And in all honesty, you know, that stood by me, that issue of anger and how you deal with anger. So I've picked the title of my talk today, Rage for Change. Couple those two traits about being a freedom fighter and an angry child with a strong relationship with God and a sense of purpose from a very young age, that I was born to do something, and that everybody was born to live a life of purpose and to make a difference. These traits surfaced again very early in life. Even though I took a very traditional path of going to Wharton undergrad and working at McKinsey, I always sought out opportunities for non-traditional roles. And I think starting off in America actually was a very interesting place to start off with. And ideally, my parents would not have sent us abroad, but I was a child of the 90s, where under the Abacha regime, those who grew up on campus know how hot it was. On a daily basis, there were riots and school closures, and for periods of 6 months on end, people wouldn't go to school. And so that was a choice that was available to us. But I think interfacing with the African American community actually taught me about sacrifice. And I was a beneficiary of so many of these minority programs, such as Inroads and SEO, and the Black Client Service staff at McKinsey, where people of color helped each other succeed. I think that is something that I would never forget about that experience. And so this same attributes kind of led me to pick a very untraditional summer opportunity, because in business school you have a summer opportunity between your first and second year. And I turned down the traditional jobs to actually go to Ramallah in the Middle East to work with an organization called the Center for Middle East Competitive Strategy. And this organization was started by Michael Porter. And the idea behind the organization seemed so good at the time, you know, gullible MBA student, that if we could get people in the Middle East to trade, that would lead to lasting peace. So if countries could work with each other, you know, we could ensure that there was peace. And so one hot afternoon in Ramallah, Palestinian territory, one of the team members asked me a question. He said, "Why are you here helping our country when yours is such a mess?" And that question really rattled me. You know, it's for one thing for Nigerians to say Nigeria is a mess, but for a Palestinian to tell you that your country is a mess, that really rattled me, and I really had to think about it and say, what am I actually doing here helping other people? And so my final year in business school, we organized the first Africa Business Conference, and I was the pioneer of that. And the theme was reversing the brain drain. I remember my speech very vividly. I was such a young, naive 24-year-old, and I said, you know, I ended my speech with this African proverb, you know, do not follow the path. Go where there is no path and leave a trail. And that was what I thought I was going to be doing, leaving a trail. And I decided to spend some time in Nigeria after my MBA, working with an internship at the Ford Foundation, helping two microfinance organizations, Cohen and Fadu. And Cohen and Fadu had 700,000 members. And it was a very fascinating experience, but I was very angry during that summer. Because microfinance has been touted as, one solution out of poverty. But working with these women who were doing adire and ashoke, I realized that they would never get out of poverty, even though they had microfinance, because they were selling the fabric at below cost. Nobody had ever spent the time to help them figure out how much am I actually buying the raw materials for, how much am I selling it for, am I incorporating my time? And that really made me angry. And I realized that I had to do something about entrepreneurship development, and that most people didn't understand what business was. So 9 months later, after going back to McKinsey because they paid for my business school, leaving early and having to take out a loan to pay them back, I was back in Nigeria working with Fola Adiola to establish the Faith Foundation. And Faith is a nonprofit that helps young people who are unemployed start businesses. And it was a pioneer in 2000 because there was no organization like that in Nigeria. We had the first business plan competition in the country. We organized the first incubator center, and Faith has gone on to do tremendous work. 2 years later, my anger resurfaced again on a spring break trip with my husband's MBA class in Guatemala. I was looking through the window and I was like, this is supposed to be one of the poorest Latin American countries, but there are no potholes, no police checkpoints, they haven't taken the lights. I was wondering what was going on, and I came up with 4 words that I thought were missing in the African context: leadership, effectiveness, accountability, and professionalism. And that's what LEAP stands for. So this journey to start LEAP was really propelled by the conviction that Africa desperately needed a new generation of visionary leaders who would transform our continent. Leaders who were creative, ethical, disciplined, and credible. People who had integrity. And that if we could have a group of people who shared the same values, working together to be change agents, we could transform our country and our continent. Very noble indeed, don't you think? The challenge is that it's a lot harder to change the mindset of people and to change the way that people live. We have made some progress, and LEAP just celebrated its 10th anniversary in November. We've pioneered curriculum on leadership in civics, management, governance, and succession. We've helped entrepreneurs believe that they can be leaders and they can build companies that would outlive them. We've instituted programs in public schools, training teachers how to teach leadership, ethics, and civics. And for all our programs, we ask our young people, what makes you angry about your country? What makes you angry about your community? And what can you do about it? A lot has been said about anger earlier today. We saw the pictures of the Nigerians who stood up against the fuel subsidy. Earlier speakers have spoken about anger and young people protesting. And anger can be a force for evil, right? But there's a place for anger when you try to do good. Because you have to be angry enough about your situation to get up from your seat and say, I'm going to do something to make sure that other people don't suffer the way I have suffered. And so that's what we get our young people to do. To be mad enough to make a difference. And that's one philosophy that we preach at LEAP Africa. Beyond encouraging our participants to start change projects, we support them to develop clear visions, budgets, form strategic partnerships, measure their impact, and develop sustainability strategies to ensure that these initiatives outlive their direct involvement. So we've actually helped young people start 1,000 change projects in their communities. And I'll just show you a few examples of some of our young people. Idris Abdullahi started a change project called Be a Hero, Give Blood. Now, many of you in the public health space who have worked in Africa know that one of the biggest issues is blood donors. And that whenever there's a crisis, it's tough to get blood, because Africans don't like to give blood. There are lots of superstitions about even getting other people's blood. But what he does is encourage people to give blood and create awareness about the need for blood donors. Toyosi Akerele, some of you have heard about, is the CEO of Rise Group, and she's a young person who's a beneficiary of our Integrity Institute. And when she spoke at our 10th anniversary, she said, you know, one thing I'll never forget about LEAP was that they actually locked the door because I came late and I wasn't allowed in. Something as simple as teaching people that time is money and that African time is a thing of the past. And with our Leadership, Ethics, and Civics program, we teach teachers who go on to teach students about leadership, ethics, and civics. And one of our youth projects was a program, one of the change projects the youth came up with in Ekulobia in Anambra State, was basically free eye tests for drivers of public vehicles. Because guess what? Most of these drivers can't see. Nobody has ever put them through an eye test. And guess why they have, one of the number one killers of young people in Africa is road accidents. Is that news to you? So the challenge is, these young people came up with a change project after their LEAP experience to transform the lives of others. And I could go on and on about experiences such as this. Apart from LEAP, my rage for change, when I saw female university students in all our leading universities whose primary dream is to move from university into their husband's home and have a male child to secure their place in the home, stay in bad marriages just because that source of finances is that same man, led me to establish NIA. And NIA stands for Ndu, Ike, and Akunuba. Life, strength, and wealth. Focused on helping young women achieve their highest potential. I want to underscore that each of these initiatives have really been supported by wonderful people, and that I can't take credit for any of the impact we've been able to have. Now to my newest adventure, Ace Foods. With the experience that I've got in the nonprofit sector, I've become more realistic about what nonprofits can achieve. And I'll be honest with you, there's a place for nonprofits, but when you create a for-profit, you create a sustainable enterprise that can employ tons of people, and then you can fund your own nonprofits, and then you don't have to depend on funders. But consider the statistics, and I'm sure you'll share my rage. 60% of the Nigerian population is engaged in agriculture. However, 40 to 60% of our fruits and vegetables go to waste. We have one of the highest rates of malnutrition. 41% of our children under 5 are stunted. 14% are wasted. This leads to infant mortality and affects mental development. We talked about mental health earlier. You wonder why we have some of the people we have in positions of authority? 90% of the processed food consumed in Nigeria is imported. And it's not just Nigeria, all over Africa. I've lived in Senegal, I've worked in Ghana. It breaks my heart to see that we import stuff from all over the world when we grow the best food in our own countries. Food is expensive in Nigeria. About 50% of household income is spent on food. Imagine that. So the challenge is why? And what can we do about it? My husband and I established a company called Ace Foods, where we source from farmers and process for the local population. And it's been tough. It sounds good on paper, but it's been tough. We faced the biggest challenge, changing the mindsets of the average Nigerian that food grown locally, sourced locally is better than imported food. And changing the mindsets of fast-moving consumer goods companies that they should buy locally. Companies like Indomie import 50 tons of chili pepper for all those who buy Indomie in the room. They don't buy from Ace Foods. Why? Why? That made us angry, and it still makes us angry, and we're fighting the good fight to ensure that we have high-quality food. One thing I'm pushing informally is a local food content bill. We have a local content bill, now we need a local food content bill that forces companies to buy locally if they can find high quality and affordable prices instead of importing. Will you join me in that fight? Yes. So as I conclude, I'm often overwhelmed by the magnitude of development challenges that we face in Nigeria and indeed on the African continent. People have spoken about them all day. Insecurity, the health indicators, the educational system, the poor infrastructure, the levels of corruption, the list goes on and on. And through my experiences with FATE, LEAP, NIA, and now ACE, I have a greater appreciation for the magnitude of work that we have to do. The work is immense. To transform communities, to transform countries, we've only scratched the surface. But I believe that we were born for a time like this, and that history will hold us accountable. The challenge for us elites sitting in this room, and some of you might not think you're elite, but you're all elite, because only 5% of the population in my country goes on to higher education. Only 5%. So if you have any form of higher education, you're the elite. The challenge for us is to figure out how to channel our rage and our anger into positive change. We love to talk as Africans, we love to complain, but we love to blog, we love to do Twitter. But we need to get off our seats and actually start doing what? Acting. Because that's the challenge before us. What happens with the middle class? How do we get so deadened to things around us? How do we stop seeing what's going on around us? More importantly, how do we ensure that our children don't get deadened to these things? Many of us shield our children from what's going on. We build bigger walls so they don't see the shacks next door. We buy Jeeps so that they don't see the potholes or don't feel them. And then we have convoys from the airport so they don't deal with traffic. I mean, this was even resonated recently when I did a program for elite kids. Some mom said, can you do, our kids are home for the holidays, can you do a program? And I asked the kids, what makes you angry about Nigeria? When I was trying to fight off their iPhones and their iPods. And nobody raised their hand. There was nothing they could see. And then one guy said, he raised his hand. He said, Man U fans. I said, what? Man U fans? That's what makes you angry about Nigeria? The fact that people know more about the European League than they do about their own country, that makes me angry. So I'm going to end with just two quotes that I love. This quote from Aristotle that says, anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, and at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not within everyone's power. That is not easy. And the final quote, which is the one that my current mantra, is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And the challenge for us right now, for those people who have decided they're going to act, is how do we keep this flame going? How do we keep angry enough to want to change the system, regardless of how slow it is and how long it's going to take? The only way is by supporting each other, by working hand in hand, by encouraging each other, by fueling the flame. And the momentum and the inspiration that I've got from the Middle East, from South America, from Guatemala, from Ramallah, from the United States, and from my own country, challenges me to continue to fight the good fight and to reach out a hand to all of you to fight for a better future. So get angry, stay angry, and work together. Let's go far together. Thank you very much.